Welcome to this new how-to. In this how-to we're gonna look at how you can use the autopilot in the F22A Raptor, which has been updated recently. So what you would expect is that you can switch on the autopilot here and you can switch on the other options like the altitude, etc. on the top, but that's not the case. You need to move to a different position. So currently you can see that we're flying and we're decreasing altitude, also decreasing the speed. Engines are working fine. And on the bottom you will find the autopilot section, which can be found here. So this button is I would say used to switch on the autopilot, and this one or these two can be used to increase or decrease the throttle, but that only works in case you switch on the auto throttle option. So let's start with that, right? So let's switch on the auto throttle option. And then you directly hear the engines increasing speed. Right, so you need to be aware of that. In this case it's set to 468. And if you use the minus button here, you will see that it decreases the speed. So let's switch it back to 430. Unfortunately you need to keep an eye on the one on the top. So we're gonna switch it back to 430 because that doesn't make too much noise, and we don't like to make a lot of noise. You see that we're also dropping altitude massively. So let's make sure that we're, I would say, increasing the altitude to reasonable altitude. You can do that by pressing the Alt plus or Alt minus button again. So we're gonna increase the altitude here. Let's say the longer you press the button, the faster it works. You can also see that after we made the changes, it now starts blinking, right? So, but it continues to drop, which means that the altitude has not been picked up yet, and that makes sense because we didn't switch on the master button. So if we would now switch on the master button, you will see that the aircraft starts to climb again. So the auto throttle works independently of the master switch. So you can switch on the auto throttle without, let's say, involving the master switch at all. Then we've got the heading option. Right, the heading option is something which you can use to fly a certain direction. You can also see that there's a nav option here. So if we switch on the nav option here, you will see that the aircraft directly starts to turn, and that's because it's using GPS. So you can either choose to use the heading mode or use the GPS mode. In some cases it doesn't pick up the GPS mode because you're not close enough to the pink line, which you can see here. If that happens, you need to move closer by using the heading option. And then as soon as it's, I would say, you're close enough, you can switch on the nav option, which will work fine. In this case, you can see that it's a little bit weird because we set up the altitude, but if you look at the bottom of the screen, you can still see that the alt mode switched off because, it's not, I would say, mandatory to switch it on, because you can see that because we set the altitude, it's using the vertical speed mode to, I would say, increase or decrease altitude. And that also results in that it will try to, let's say, level out off the altitude we did set up. So it's increasing and decreasing, right? So the VS, also known as the vertical speed, can be set by using the plus and minus button, and that will, let's say, using that option you can increase or decrease the climb rate. So if you want to climb fast, you click on VS plus. If you want to decrease fast, you click on VS minus. In this case, the speed mode is set to airspeed, which is done by the auto throttle, so we don't need to switch that on. We can switch on the altitude mode, but you can see after we've done that, it will automatically disable the vertical speed mode. So you can either enable the altitude mode or the vertical speed mode. You can't enable both of them. The same is applicable for the heading mode and the nav mode. You can only switch on the heading mode or the nav mode. You can't switch on both of them. and now we're flying, right? So we're following the course. We can leave the joystick, I'd say, untouched, and the aircraft will do what it needs to do. So some other tricks, right? Let's assume that we want to decrease the altitude. Well, we can also do that. Let's have a look at it. The hard part again is you need to, let's say, kind of zoom out from here and then decrease the altitude. In some case you're lucky and you can leave the button on. In some case you need to press it a few times before it really changes the things. So we're gonna go and decrease it further. So let's see if we can. So we're now at 570. 422. So it really depends on which mode you prefer, but using the, I would say, built-in automatic camera modes, and then that works mostly, and then by using the zoom in and zoom out option, that works. You can now see that it has switched automatically to alt select mode, but the vertical speed is set to 0 FPM, which means it doesn't decrease, it will stay on this altitude. So what we need to do is, if we want to decrease our altitude, we need to let's say change the option, and this will help us configuring the feet per minute which we're decreasing the altitude. So in this case we're decreasing with 1000 feet per minute until we hit the 40,000 feet which we pre-configured. Normally in other aircrafts you would have the FLC, the flight level change option, which you can use, and that will figure out, okay, hey, I need to keep this speed and I need to decrease with this number of feet per minute. But in this fighter jet you don't have that option, so keep that in mind. Other thing is the heading mode, and that's something we didn't discuss, right? So while we're decreasing altitude, let's have a look at the heading mode. And the heading mode can also be changed by the options here, by the plus and the minus, and then you will see that the option, or the blue part here, changes. So let me change it a bit, right? So let's change it to 30. You see that two things are now happening, right? This blue part has changed to 300, and also the heading selector mode has changed to 300. So if we would now switch on the heading mode, you will see that the aircraft will start to turn left. So let's do that. You can see that directly it switches off the nav mode and starts to make the turn until it hits the blue part, and when it hits the blue part it's in the correct direction and will continue to fly that specific direction. In the meantime we can decrease speed also, but let's first wait till we're aligned at 300 degrees. We're gonna decrease speed to 395, and you can see that the longer you press the button, this, I would say, the faster it decreases, right? So that's good. So we're now at 300, and that's the other option, right? So you can use either the heading option or the nav option to change direction. So we would now, let's say, change back to nav mode. You will see that the aircraft directly starts to, I'd say, correct its direction and will fly towards the direction which we pre-set up. And the good thing is that while making the turn, you can also see that the autopilot automatically adjusts the decrease or increase angle, and also the engine is being throttled automatically, right? So that's something which really helps. So you don't have to do anything. To see which options is activated, you can look at the top of this screen, because it now shows me that nav mode is on because it's GPS, autopilot is activated, and it's using the vertical speed mode with a climb rate, or in this case a descent rate of 1000 feet per minute. And once we're, I would say, close to the configured altitude, you will see that it will switch to select mode, because that makes sense, because it's flying on that selected altitude. So in the initial case we use GPS for navigation, but you also can use, for example, 4.1, 4 and 4.2, right? But that can be done by pressing this button. So normally what you would probably do is using the GPS mode. If you've done that, or if you prefer to fly from based on the navigation radios, you can switch the active nav to either 4.1 or 4.2. Keep in mind that if you're pushing that button, that the nav mode will be switched off, and you need to re-enable it to make sure that it's picking up the correct configuration. Normally in other aircrafts it will remain on, but it doesn't pick up the signal, so it will try to fly in that or in the previous direction until you disabled and then re-enabled it. In our case, or in this aircraft's case, it disables the navigation mode if you switch the active nav. So we discussed most of the buttons. The only button we didn't discuss yet is the approach button, and the approach button can be used for approaches. So if you're close to an airport, you can use the approach mode to do, for example, an ILS approach, right? That automatically tries to figure out the glide scope, but then you need to make sure that you're following the guidelines, so which means that you're flying at a certain altitude, so it can pick up the glide scope. And then once it's picked up the glide scope, you will see that the aircraft will, let's say, automatically follow the glide scope until you're very close to the runway. And the last part you need to do yourself, right? It's not, I would say, a completely automatic landing, but it helps, I would say, doing an easier landing. But in most cases you will probably prefer to do the manually landing yourself. What are other options from the autopilot? Well, there are not a lot of other options in this case. There are some options which you can use in this aircraft specifically. For example, if we go back, there's the air brakes and the extended flaps and the retracted flaps, but they don't have to do anything with the autopilot. So the autopilot section can be found here. If you're done with the autopilot and you don't want to make any changes, then you can use the back button to move to the previous page. Nice option. I'd say it's pretty easy, between brackets, autopilot. It allows you to do a lot of things. The other thing which is a little bit weird is that the aircraft is shown to the right of the pink line. Well, here it says it's flying directly to it, but I've seen that with other aircrafts also. So here ends this video where we looked at the autopilot of the F22 jet. Hope you liked it. If you liked it, then consider to use the like button. If you got questions or comments, then feel free to post them in the comment box below. And of course, if you want to stay up to date about my new videos on my channel, then make sure that you're subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching and see you next time.